Iowa football is going to have the best defense in the country in 2024. A big weekend, 2 more returns to the number 7 team in the country defensively a year ago. It'll be better in 2024. Today,
you are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat more than 50 infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Great weekend for the Hawkeyes. We will get into everything that went on. The basketball team gets the sweep against Rutgers, the women on Friday night with the win against the Scarlet Knights on the road. And then on Saturday, the Iowa men get their first victory of the year. But maybe the bigger stories of the weekend is what happened inside the football program. 2 more returns to that elite defense from a year ago will be coming back to play their final season in a Hawkeye uniform. Sebastian Castro, the outstanding cash slot cornerback, will be back for another season. He'll be coupled now with Nick Jackson coming back for another season. It's amazing. Nick Jackson, a young man that, of course, began his career at Virginia. When Iowa got him out of the portal a year ago, there were questions about how he was going to fit, where he was going to fit in the scheme for Iowa defensively. He was a guy that played in the middle of the Virginia defense and making his way in. We knew that Jay Higgins was coming back for another season. Obviously, a guy that played a whole lot of football. Kyler Fisher was there. Carson Shire, who they remain high on. Injuries have just unfortunately been an issue for him. But you wondered where he'd fit. And it went into August camp where it was kind of a 1-2 punch, figuring out what they were going to do. Who was going to be the middle linebacker? Who was going to be the one that played outside? Ultimately, it was Higgins in the middle, Jackson on the outside. And for Nick Jackson, it was a slow start to this season. I don't think disappointing would be the right term to use for it, but it certainly wasn't at the high level I thought it was going to be right away from him. But you have to remember, again, he was playing a different position. He was not only walking into a new scheme and finding out what that all entails, didn't have the same kind of practice reps that many of the other guys didn't grow up in the Iowa system, but he was also doing it while learning another system and doing it in the Big Ten, and a step up from the Big Ten, maybe from the ACC, at least some years that you see in that one. But as the season went on, you saw him become much more comfortable, much more impactful on the defensive end. He was a guy that was moving sideline to sideline. And though Jay Higgins was the guy all season long that really dominated the headlines, he was the guy that was out there a bunch and getting all the notoriety. You know, when you'd see the Big Ten awards and he continued to pile up big numbers, no surprise, playing in the middle of that defense, you're going to do that. And that's what Iowa's defense is built towards, is occupying space up front, have that defensive line take on all the blockers, and then the guys back behind them, they're the ones that clean it up. But Nick Jackson improved so much throughout the course of the year, and not only coming back for another season, which is great. His defense is going to be outstanding. Look, the defense is good every single year now with Phil Parker, what he has done, the evolution that he made, the change that he made going to the cash position, and just how good that has been for Iowa defensively. You go back and, he saw that there was a wart with this Iowa defense, and even all the good defenses that they had issues, and they were susceptible against teams that were running the spread. I mean, how many times going back to Norm Parker did you see Iowa just out there in the 4-3 playing quarters back behind it, and there's another linebacker guarding a slot receiver, and he picks up 15 yards on a crossing route. We saw that a ton, right? Well, you make this change. And though they've had different types of guys running the position, right? They've all been different, from Amadi Hooker and what he was and the way that he ran the position. Really good safety. Dane Belton was more of that hybrid type of player where he was corner, he was slot, he was a guy that could kind of move around and had, I think, a little bit more maybe cornerback skills than what you saw before with Hooker. And now Sebastian Castro. And you add Castro coming back to this. Some of the numbers and the metrics out there from places like Pro Football Focus are through the roof for Sebastian Castro. I mean, this is a guy that put up elite level coverage numbers. We know the big plays that he made. I mean, of course, the pick six against Iowa State, really to win that football game against the Cyclones earlier this season. That was monstrous. But then you also see the physicality that he plays with. And that's something that's also ultra exciting about this team and what they're going to be is just what they have now and the physical element that they're going to have. So this is what your starting defense is. And I think at least on paper, you have to say this is the best defense in the country next year. Right, number 7 a year ago defensively. And with all these guys coming back, I mean, how much higher can they be? How much better can they be with a competent offense? And we'll talk about that coming up here in just a little bit as we continue to wait what's going to happen for the new offensive coordinator. But this is a team that was on the field as much as anybody. In fact, more than anybody, because it was not complimentary football a year ago. It was a bad offense, and not only a bad offense that turned it over. So coming into next season, on paper, this is what I was going to have. Your defensive line up front. You start with Deontay Craig. A down year for him, but this is a guy that showed the first 2 seasons he was out there a bunch. He can get to the quarterback. He can play the run. He is not just an edge rusher, nothing like that. Numbers were down, at least getting to the quarterback this year, what we saw the previous year. I think with a healthy season, Deontay Craig has a chance to have a monster year. On the other side, Ethan Hurkett. Hurkett, great game against Iowa State. Great game in the end, had the interception against Nebraska. He was just a guy, every time he was out there, he showed up. I mean, he was just there time in and time out, making plays, big time plays for this team. He was a playmaker. Now it's different. Taking over for a guy like Joe Evans, he's got to be able to do it instead of 20, 25, 30 snaps a game. You got to do it 50, 60, maybe 70 snaps a game for Hurkett. But we know that he can do it, and he's certainly shown an ability to do that. How about the middle of the defense? Y.A. Black. We've been waiting for the big man to have it all come together, stay healthy. And though he battled injury again this season, had that shoulder injury that at the time against Wisconsin, a lot of people thought maybe this was going to be a season ender, was not the case. And not only that, after that game, he continued to ascend. He was already playing the best football of his career, and he got better as he was battling a pretty significant shoulder injury at the end of the season. And then Aaron Graves, and we're waiting for everything to kind of click with Aaron Graves this season. He was an All-American coming in, big-time offers, and if he wouldn't have committed to Iowa so early, I mean, this is a guy that most everybody in the country would have wanted. Small school football player, played at the high school level, down there, but now bounced it up. And Aaron Graves, certainly in terms of ability, you got to be excited about him and more one of the more highly regarded guys coming out of high school of this Iowa defense. So that's what you got up front. That's your front four. It's pretty salty. Well, we know the linebackers. I'm Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson. Just ridiculous. Then you throw in the cash position, what you're going to get from Sebastian Castro. You go to the defensive backfield. You got Jamari Harris, who's played a lot of football, shaken off the rust this year. Of course, injury took away his 2022 season. 2021, though, he was a really good cornerback for them. And I thought improved as the year went on. And he got a lot of targets coming his way because he had Cooper DeJean for most of the year on the other side. Well, you throw on the other side now to Sean Lee that got so much experience this year. 8th at the beginning of the year with Harris sitting out those 2 games with the gambling suspension. And then the final couple games of the year, obviously with Cooper DeJean out with the injury. He's played a ton there. And then you're, at least right now, your safety tandem, Xavier Wampa, another guy that was banged up this year. I think Xavier's best football still isn't in front of him. Would love to see him with the healthy season as he was really banged up this year. And Cohen Entringer would be the other starter at this point in time. And what are they going to do in that safety position? Who's the free safety? Who's the strong safety? That will be something to keep an eye on this year. I wouldn't be surprised if Schulte doesn't come back for another year, if we do see Xavier Wampa maybe move over to that free safety role. And then you have Entringer that becomes a guy over on the strong side. That is as salty of a defense as you're going to find in college football. It is an exciting time. No doubt about it for Iowa football coming up this year and that defense. But there are 2 sides to the equation. Yes, you need to be able to do a little bit on the offensive side. What's happening with the OC search? We'll get into that and talk about next year's offense. Can they complement what we see out of this salty defense? And that's not all. We mentioned the starters. There's still other decisions out there, and there's some depth to this defense too. We'll talk some more football. Got basketball coming your way as well as we take a look at the double dip for Iowa men's and women's basketball over Rutgers over the weekend. We continue. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season wrapped up here today, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook with the playoffs here. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 moneyline bet. You heard that right. Place a $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Whew, that sounds like a good way to start off your account at FanDuel. The app is so easy to use and so many different ways for you to bet. Live same-game parlays, pre-game same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find the most popular parlays that are out there. Build your own or just keep it simple. Play futures, play point spreads, play over-unders. They can do that and a whole lot more at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an easy one with FanDuel. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Trent Condon back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. And we got you covered talking Hawkeyes each and every day. Basketball season, wrestling season. We'll get into those coming up here in just a little bit. But Trent, you might be saying right now, that's all well and good. The defense looks salty. They're going to be elite again this year. What about the offense? Well, we talked about the guys coming back for the final year of eligibility for many of them. You also got to throw in the mix Luke Lachey's coming back. Yeah, Lachey's coming back for another season. Cade McNamara, we will see. I know the excitement a week ago, and I was right there with you about the potential of Ty Thompson coming in, the former 5-star quarterback, played high school ball in Arizona, was up at Oregon, got passed as they decided to go out to bring in Dylan Gabriel this year. There was excitement there. Well, he committed to Tulane, and with it, likely has a wink and a nod that he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Green Wave, something that would not have been the case realistically for Iowa this season. But McNamara, we know leadership qualities that he has. We know that this is a guy that certainly's got guys excited. And we haven't seen a healthy Cade McNamara. Now, that's kind of the pull, right? He hasn't been healthy in 2 years. From what he sustained with the injury back in August camp on Kids Day, leading to the ACL tear in the game against Michigan State. Year previous, when he was at Michigan and J.J. McCarthy was ascending to taking that job, what we saw in that. And then, obviously, a season-ending injury. This is a guy that's had major injuries now to each knee over the past 2 seasons. His frailty is a concern. That means he's not going to be out there in a full-time capacity, obviously, coming up this spring. So it's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to figure out, is Marco Lainez a guy that at minimum can be your backup next season? I don't believe Iowa can go into the year with Deacon Hill as their backup quarterback because of the frailty of Cade McNamara. Now, the problem is Iowa is currently now at 89 scholarship players. You got to be at 85. And you got a full complement in the running back room. And you got a lot of dudes and a lot of decisions that need to be made. And we're not going to push anybody out the door. That's not what we're going to do. We're just wildly throw out speculation. I pass around rumors. I'm happy to do that. If I hear something, I always will pass it along to you, at least if I believe there's even a shred of hope that something like that could come to a reality. Wide receiver needs to be better. I think they're still searching for an X receiver. That's something. And ultimately, it comes down to the offensive line. I mean, regardless of who the new OC is going to be, if this team can't block, they're going to be in trouble. Now, I would argue that this offensive line maybe is not as bad as it's looked. And certainly this season, they made strides this year. I mean, you saw from 2022 to 23, there were improvements. The problem, as the offense continued to crater and get worse and worse throughout the course of the year, you also saw teams get closer and closer to the line of scrimmage and a passing scheme that just didn't work. He didn't have the playmakers to make it anything that could be possible. I think schematically in the passing game, Iowa was just light years behind what you saw for most competent offenses in college football, and that showed up. I mean, it's fine to have the tight end be an important part of what you do offensively. And that's all well and good. I was done that for a number of years, but it can't be all. And it can't be all trying to scheme up ways you're trying to get the ball to the tight end. Unfortunately for Iowa, it felt like they just continued to go further and further back into that and not figure out ways to get the ball out wide. I mean, how many deep shots did Iowa take? One of the few good things about Deacon Hill was his ability, at least early on, to take shots down the field. And that got coached out of him again by a quarterback coach that knows nothing about quarterbacks. That was a problem. If it's Paul Chryst, if it's Joe Philbin, if it's who we don't even know, a random name that hasn't been brought up, whatever it turns out to be, there is opportunity there because this thing has cratered. And early in the Brian Ferentz tenure, though there were bad games, it wasn't as bad as what we saw the last couple of years. I mean, you look back at Nate Stanley, I think it'd be jaw-dropping for a lot of people because what they've seen recently, they believe, is what it's been the whole way through. That's not the case. A new offensive coordinator will have the ability to adjust, to do different things, to build an offense like they want. Will it be enough? Will Kirk Ferentz be as hands-off as maybe some people want him to? Well, we can argue that side of it, no doubt. But what we do know is each offensive coordinator at Iowa has looked different. Ken O'Keefe's offense looked much different than Greg Davis's. And Brian Ferentz's offense looked different than both of those guys. All three of the offenses did look different. There is an ability for you to bring in different ideas, different styles, what you're trying to do. We even saw the evolution this year of what they do in the run game and the importance of that this season. Changes can be made. This offense will be better. I don't think there's any doubt because I think there's only one way to go from what we saw. I also said the same thing a year ago, and we saw the way that one played out. A new scheme will help the offensive line. A new scheme will obviously help the quarterback position, the wide receivers, even the tight ends to a certain degree. A new scheme is what this team needs, and I believe the new offensive coordinator, regardless of who it is, will be able to implement different things and get this thing okay. I mean, what's a realistic goal? An offensive line that's going to return 4 starters. Your best receiver and playmaker over the last month of the season, Caleb Brown's back for another year. A full complement of running backs. I mean, they got options. And Cade McNamara, a quarterback that's won a whole lot of football games as a starter at the collegiate level. The pieces are there to at least be okay. And I think Kirk will be willing to let that happen with this offense. Hoops over the weekend. It was a big one. Iowa gets 2 wins against Rutgers, one on the road for the women, one at home, the first Big Ten win of the year for the men's basketball team. And maybe the most complete performance we've seen out of the Hawkeye men so far this season. We're talking basketball as we continue here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Stay right there. We're back with more in a moment. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast is brought to you by Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but we just need to talk about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics, lots of them out there, right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. That is incredibly scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling of my son or daughter, one of my kids getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medications that they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay. And we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff, it can happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Once again, jasemedical.com with the offer code LOCKEDON for $20 off your order. Jase Medical, JASE Medical.com. Trent Condon back with you one final time. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Let's get into the hoops and a great weekend. It really was as the Iowa women rolled. Before we get to that game, though, let's talk a little bit about the men. Their first Big Ten victory of the season. Now, excuse me, a little frog in the throat there. We'll get that thing cleared up. Here we go. All right. Well, it started with the news from late in the morning that Patrick McCaffery wasn't going to be there. He was out with illness. And it was odd. Okay, illness, that happens. I mean, we've seen plenty of guys miss games because of illness. But then he showed up on the bench, had his hood up. And we talked about a year ago about this time is what he took the pause to the season. And this is a delicate situation. It really is. A young man that battled cancer, a young man that has battled mental health issues. And you want to be careful with what you say. You just hope for the best for him and figure out what it's going to take to either get him back on the floor and playing at a high level, because that hasn't been the case for Patrick McCaffery this year. He still can knock down a shot. He can still hit an open three. He's got a lane to the rim. He's going to dunk it. But you just haven't seen the engagement you want out of a senior, a guy that should be a leader. I mean, that's what happens when you get older, right? You become more of a leader. And you just didn't get to see a guy that's been engaged enough. 2 offensive rebounds this year, 5 fouls against him, 5 fouls that he's been whistled for. He's just not there. And there's too much talent in there to just go through the motions. And it could be a whole lot more, something a whole lot deeper than anything we certainly could anticipate. And if that's the case, make it right. Get right yourself. College basketball, it's important to us. This Iowa basketball program is incredibly important to me. I've said it before here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Iowa basketball is number one. It's what I grew up with. My love for Iowa basketball is really what made me the Iowa fan that I am today. It was hoops back in the 80s. That's what it was that really sucked me in. Football, great. But basketball, it was different for me. It's important, but more important. And as ticked off as I get during the course of a game and yelling at the TV, and we're still talking about a life here. And we're still talking about a guy that's still figuring things out and trying to get right. So get that right. Because on the floor, this team probably played their best game of the year. They put 86 points up against a pretty good Rutgers defense. Now, not a great Rutgers team. They're good inside. Big Cliff back for another season, doing his thing, making it difficult. Amori is he's a physical specimen. 6'11", 250. He's a big guy in there. Causes problems. But Iowa got the better of him. They made it very difficult on him, and playing the bigs together, even as we saw again foul trouble for Owen Freeman this time in the first half of the game. Ben Krikke was excellent. Peyton Sanford started to get the shot down, but not only that, you got to see a little bit more. So Josh Dix got the start, which was confounding to me. If you're an everydayer, you know I've been hollering now for the last couple of weeks after Tony Perkins was inserted in there. Let's get a real point guard and see what this thing can look like with a real point guard getting a bunch of minutes. Instead, they went with Josh Dix. Again, not a full-time point guard, but it was Dix and Perkins in the backcourt, Sanford, and then up front, Freeman and Krikke. It's a fine lineup. I don't have a huge problem with that lineup playing together. I just don't think they should be the starters. Now, you saw Josh Dix do a lot of good things. Didn't see a ton off the bench. Kind of tightened up a little bit. DeBelly, 9 minutes. 9 minutes for Harding. 13 for Price Sanford. And DeSante Bowen played 18. That was the most off the bench. Browns came in there late in the half. Got in foul trouble. Got 2 fouls right away. One on a moving screen. The other one defensively. Probably the reason he doesn't play a whole lot. A lot of fouling with Evan Browns. I'd like to see more. But that aside. Just a feel-good day. One of the craziest parts, though, of this game. 9,273. On a Saturday game, you're not fighting with the NFL. You're not fighting with college football. You're not fighting with a late tip time. I guess it was an early tip time. It wasn't a Sunday game. It was a Saturday game. We've heard those complaints before. We know it's not the building. Could Carver be better? Yeah, it could. But we hear that thing loud for women's basketball. We've heard it loud for decades for wrestling. 9,273 in a 15,000 seat arena. Not a whole lot of demands for a Big Ten game. And no, it wasn't Michigan State or Indiana. It wasn't a rivalry against Wisconsin or Minnesota. Illinois wasn't coming to town. I get that. It was Rutgers. But I think it says a lot about where the fan base is. That was the attendance. And not even the attendance, that was the paid attendance. Because you got to anticipate there was certainly less than that in the building. On the other side, Friday night, what a story for the Iowa women's basketball team. So they go out there, really cool to see Vivian Stringer honored. Obviously, her connection to the University of Iowa, what she did, leading the program to their first Final Four back before a season ago on the women's side. But maybe the biggest impact for me was seeing the national scale that again developed and seeing this. Now, the old rack, not a big gym, called Jersey Mike's now. Seats 8,000. It was sold out. But on Thursday night, Brian Ray, what a great job he did getting the pictures up out in Times Square. How cool that was. Iowa going to New York and doing that, then going back over to Jersey to play the game. Iowa wins by 34, 103-69. A triple-double for Caitlin Clark, but it's not that. It's this Beatles mania that happens with this team. And there was a picture, it was from the AP, of, again, just not just hordes of little girls waiting after the game for Caitlin Clark's autograph. That was there. But it was also just seeing the amount of media that were just kind of standing around and doing the same thing, taking pictures, watching, seeing on a national scale. Folks, we talked about this during football season. There's times you just got to enjoy it. And though there are, I think, some concerns with this Iowa women's team, now, they didn't show up on Friday night as they were able to run away in the second quarter and cruise into the victory. And Gabby got her shot back. That was great to see. She was able to knock down 4 3-pointers in the game. Great. Hannah Stuelke doing a little bit of everything. 10 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. Awesome. Triple-double. Molly Davis out there. Still always adding a little bit more. Love that from her. And then Kate Martin just being the glue, right? Falter off the bench with a double-double. You're worried about inside. You're worried if Hannah Stuelke gets into foul trouble against a good big, and they'll see one on Saturday night, what it's going to be. But this ride, it's unlike anything we've seen before. We've seen national champions in wrestling. We've seen great athletes. We've seen All-Americans. We've seen National Player of the Years in men's basketball. We've seen All-Americans. We see them almost every year in football. This is different. Enjoy the ride. Ride continues this week against Purdue before the monster matchup on Fox. Big Fox will have it next Saturday night as they take on Indiana. Of course, the Hoosiers, very good team with Mackenzie Holmes and company coming in to that one. It'll be absolutely bonkers. And Gus will be in town. That's right. Gus Johnson will be there to be on the call for Fox for the Iowa women's game against Indiana next Saturday night. Amazing. Enjoy the ride. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Always happy to be with you and talking everything going on in the world of Hawkeye athletics. National duels over the weekend. The women's wrestling program gets their first national championship on the dual side of things. Great work out of them and the continued anticipation. What's going to happen on the men's side with the Ferraris? We got you covered here on Locked On Hawkeyes. We'll talk more about that later on the week. Also want to let you know Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Hey, make sure you hit subscribe here on Locked On Hawkeyes, your team every day. We got you covered on the Hawkeye side of things, your favorite MLB, NHL, NBA, NFL team, the national shows, Locked On Big Ten. Craig's doing a great job over there. Maybe you're a fantasy player, maybe you like betting. a little bit of everything for you across the Locked On Network. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Looking forward to a lot of football conversation as we wait who will be the new Hawkeye offensive coordinator. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.